In this tutorial, we'll take a look at how to create several different kinds of maps. In this tutorial, we'll actually be using the second data set, which is on birch bark canoes built by Native American communities around the Midwest, and where they're actually stored in museums. So you can go ahead and download the data from the link in the slides or in the link that appears below the video. So once you load that data into Tableau, we'll take just a moment to explore that data and see what the variables are and the kinds of different questions that we can ask with the information that we have. So along the left, you'll see that we have a column for an ID code for each of the different canoes that are housed in museums. The next column over is the institution where they're held, the street address for that institution, that city, state, zip code, and country, as well as latitude and longitude. And note for each of these that the geographical icon appears. And for things like country and zip code, that these icons are blue, meaning that Tableau is reading this as categorical data rather than numerical. But with latitude, longitude, it's recognizing these as both geospatial information and working with them as measures or quantitative data. Next, we've got the canoe name, if it's known. In many cases, this is simply a code that the museum has assigned to that canoe. Canoe builder, if known. The affiliated culture or community that created the canoe. And then I added some columns in here for interval start date and end date to be able to create some Gantt charts and timelines with this information, showing the fuzziness of the date data. Because for many of these canoes, we know that they were built, for example, before like 1960, but we don't know exactly when. So I added an interval start date that seemed reasonable compared to the rest of the data of the year 1700. And then the end date is whatever the museum curator entered in as, well, we knew this canoe was created before 1949. For example, if it was donated in the year 1949, it was obviously created before then. So we have year built, and if it's known, it will be just a single year, or as you can see, in other cases, it's before a certain date. We have the bark type, the measurements of the canoe, length in inches, the beam length, the depth of the hold, any contact information, notes. And then we've got some calculated fields over here that I used when I was creating the Gantt charts. So perhaps you've already seen the video on creating Gantt charts, so I can just quickly show you what those look like in here. So this tells us, again, this canoe was built sometime before the early 1900s. So if I grab the interval end date and bring that over to the tooltip, I can see that this was created sometime between 1700 and 1910. So this is one way to illustrate fuzzy dates when we don't know exactly when something happened. This is also a Gantt chart. It just shows rounded, oops, let's drag institution off. It just shows rounded endpoints instead of the square rectangles. So it's just a different way to visualize it. All right, so let's get to creating some maps. So again, note that the geographic variables have, it looks like a little globe, this little world Earth icon. And let's start with some sample research questions. What can we ask that we could build some visualizations to answer? So one question would be, which countries, states, and cities have birch bark canoes from Midwestern Native American communities, and how many do they have? Where did canoes from different communities end up? And as an extension question, as you'll see when we take a look at the country data, how and why did a museum in Turkey end up with a Native American canoe? So as we explore which countries, states, and cities have birch bark canoes from these Native American communities and how many, we can begin to set up our chart to answer this question. So we'll choose which geographic variable we want to focus on. So I mentioned that Turkey ended up with one of the canoes from a Native American community. So let's take a look at a map of the countries. So we can select both the country, our geographic variable, as well as it'll be in your data set, it might say sheet 1 and then count in parentheses. Mine says data, count in parentheses. So look for the variable in the measures field. It'll probably be right above the latitude and longitude, and that will be your count. So we're going to select both of those. I'm going to expand my Tableau window out so that show me appears. And then for this, I usually like to visualize this kind of information with the filled area map. So we can see that Canada ended up with 5 canoes. The United States has most of the canoes that are in this data set, and then Turkey has 1. Let me go back. So we can play with color to reveal how many canoes each location holds, and we can edit the title and labels. So I'm going to move my legend down to the bottom again to get that out of the way. And we need to give this a title. So number of canoes in museums by country. Again, we'll also add a label to our sheet. So this is a map of the countries. So the slides on the left walk you through the steps that we just took. So because that was really quick, I'll go ahead and review this. So the first thing we did is we selected the geospatial variable that we wanted to work with. I chose country because I thought that might be interesting, especially with the allusion to Turkey having one. So we'll choose one of those variables, whether it's country, city, zip code, state, and then the count. And then we selected the filled in area map from the Show Me button in the upper right corner. So again, we can edit our color. Right now, this is blue, shades of blue. We could, again, choose, I usually like to choose a diverging color range. We can apply that and see what that looks like. So the darker red indicates fewer. If we want to switch that and use that darker red color to indicate more, we can select reversed and click apply. So the blue will indicate fewer. For some reason, that makes sense to me. Perhaps because it's relation to temperature. So that gives us an area map that looks like this. Now, again, we can change our labels for the chart title. We can also change the legend and what that says. So right now it says CNT and then in parentheses data. On yours, it probably says sheet 1 in parentheses. So you can click the little drop down arrow that appears next to that legend title and then select edit title. And then that will allow us to change that. So let's say number of canoes. So the map on the left here in the slides, this is the sunrise sunset verging. So it's a different color palette than the one here in these slides. either is fine, or the shades of blue. Again, just double check to make sure that the color palette is accessible. So this map indicates how many birch bark canoes are held in museums in each country. And because we selected the count variable along with the geographic variable, in this case, country. We can also add some information if we wanted to determine the percentage of canoes held by each country. We could add that to our tooltip by taking our data variable, or our count variable. And we'll go up to tooltip and notice that that will appear with a little like dialogue icon here. And we can do a quick table calculation and select percent of total. So we got here again by selecting the drop-down arrow in count data for the tooltip. Go to quick table calculation and percent of total. So now when we mouse over each of the different countries, we can see, for example, Canada has about 9% of the canoes, United States has almost 90%, and Turkey with just one canoe has just a little under 2% of the canoes in the data set. So we've got another question here. Where did canoes from different communities end up? So for this one, I'm going to select a new sheet. Remember that the little bar chart with a plus sign is the new worksheet button. So go ahead and select that and create a new worksheet. And I'm going to select zip code because there are a number of museums in the same state, sometimes even in the same city. So I'm going to go by zip code so we can distinguish one museum from another. And then I also want to select the count. And we're going to choose symbol map from show me. So that will be this one with the little bubbles on it. It'll take it a moment just to populate. And now here we've got our legend is a size legend. So it indicates how many canoes are held in each location by the size of the bubble. If you want to increase that a little bit to make it perhaps a little easier to see, again, we can go to size on the marks card and use the slider to increase those bubble sizes. We don't want them to get too big so that they overlap. We want to make sure that they remain distinct. Then we asked about how we could determine how many canoes from each community ended up in each of these museums. And so we can go up to our affiliated culture variable and drag that from tables to color. So drag affiliated culture from tables to color and drop it. Now there are 22 members and the recommended maximum for the shelf is 20. We're going to go ahead and add all members, because most of them are unfortunately unknown. And so that's this sort of brown color, kind of bark brown here indicates unknown. But now as we mouse over, we can see the affiliated culture. And as we move toward that orange in the center of this, we see that there's one Algonquin canoe and then 4 Ojibwa canoes held here in this museum in Minnesota. Okay, the next step, of course, as usual, is to edit title and labels. Once again, I'm going to move my legends down here so that you can see the map in more detail. Again, you can change the colors for each of the different cultures represented in the map if you'd like. So we're going to rename our sheet. This is a map of canoes by culture in museum, something to that effect. So again, this slide just goes through the steps that we just took. I had to maximize my Tableau screen so that you could actually see the Show Me button in the upper right corner. So again, we selected the institution zip code, the sheet 1 count, and then went to Show Me and selected symbol map. Then to add information about the originating communities, we added affiliated culture as a color by dragging affiliated culture from tables to the color card on the marks panel. So what does this map mean and how does it help us to answer our question? So we can see that most of the canoes held in northern Michigan were created by unknown communities, and most of the canoes from known cultures were made by the Ojibwa and held primarily in Minnesota and Michigan. So our next tutorial will be on custom shapes in Tableau. Join me for that, and that will conclude our series of intermediate data visualizations in Tableau.